Please welcome Professor Dr. Graham Kendall.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm hoping that you've taken a lot away from that about the good that ChatGPT and LLMs can do in research. I'm going to try and give you the other side. It's not all good. And I'm going to talk about Predatory Publishing, paper mills and selling authorships. And I don't know if you're aware of those or the size of the problem, but I'm going to tell you what they are, tell you about the size of the problem, and then tell you why I think it's an issue. But first of all, let's take a look at, you'll all be familiar with this, who publish. This is a peer review report, not a very good one, but it's okay. It says that the appropriate to publish in the journal is excellent, the accuracy is excellent, the innovation is very good, relevance is very good, presentation is good, quality of writing is very good. Whatever that says is very good, accepted. Not strongly accepted, but accepted. And it says, few reviewer comments, please use the latest references, etc. So that's okay. If you got that, you'd be quite happy. Yeah, you could easily do those changes and do it. This journal is an open access journal, so it means you have to pay to publish. So this journal, this is going back a few years, is $150 US. So that's okay. I mean, we have to accept that it's open access. I've got views on open access, which we can maybe discuss later. So we're not bad. We've had reasonably good peer review reports, quite good actually, and they want us to pay $150. This is the paper that the author submitted. It was called "Get Me Off Your Effing Email List," and I've blocked it out because I know this is being filmed and I'm not going to say it. But it was called "Get Me Off Your Effing Email List." The paper, I think I'm right in saying, repeated that term 642 times. That was it, had nothing else in the paper. It also had a couple of figures, which also repeated those words. And that paper got those peer review reports. So that, obviously, was not peer reviewed. It's not one of my papers, I just hasten to add. So, and this is called a sting, yeah? People are sending these papers in just to see if there's any peer review. There's obviously not in this case. And this was in 2014, 2015, this happened, or 2014, and it made the national press or the international press. It was published in The Guardian and the Higher Education Ed, HE Ed. You know, and it just showed up that actually there's no peer review for that journal. But I wrote a paper on this. What happens to a journal after it accepts a spoof paper? So after it accepted that paper, which blatantly showed that it did not do peer review. So this was the 12 issues running up to when the paper was submitted, and it published this many papers in each issue, 6, 7, 7, 15, etc. And this is the following 12 issues. The number of papers slightly rose. So they still got more papers in the following 12 issues than they did in the previous 12 issues. And the journal had blatantly shown itself not to do any peer review. This is another paper that was published. You should take notice of these journals and do not submit your work to them. So this paper is a work of art. What's the deal with birds? And I'm going to read the abstract. Many people wonder, what's the deal with birds? This is a pretty common query. Birds are pretty weird. I mean, they have feathers. WTF. Most other animals don't have feathers. To investigate this issue, I looked at some birds. I looked at a woodpecker, a parrot, and a penguin. They're all pretty weird. In conclusion, we never know the deal with birds, but further study is warranted. That's good. Brilliant abstract. The acknowledgements in the paper is even better. We thank Big Bird from Sesame Street for comments on the manuscript. Several trained monkeys transcribed the videos. That paper was accepted and published. It's got a DOI, you can see. This paper was also published. This paper was written by Bradley Alf, who's a proper researcher, but he's running this sting operation. It's co-authored by Jesse Pinkman and Walter H. White, who are the characters in Breaking Bad. And the paper really tells the story of Breaking Bad. That's what it does. That paper was published. You can see volume 2020, volume 10, number 4, got page numbers there. So these are examples of sting operations. And some people don't agree with these. They think it's unethical to do it. But on that, I mean, they're the worst cases I could find. I mean, there's probably some others out there, but they're the worst cases. So I'm sure people who publish regularly get lots of emails from publishers asking you to submit papers to them. So I've got hundreds of them, and I collect them. So I'm not going to read them all out, but things like, this is from a publisher. This is asking me to submit a paper. And within that text, it says, I smell the freshness and warmth of this wonderful time with your eminent article. All published papers are indexed in well-repute indexing of world. And I get not hundreds, I get
10, 20 of these emails every week. And they're from predatory publishers. They want you to submit. It won't go through peer review. Then they want you to pay often thousands of dollars, and then the paper will get published, but it's not going to be recognised. It's not going to be any good. The paper might be good, but it's not going to be cited. It's not going to get any attention. So predatory publishing is a real problem. It's been a real problem for many years, since about 2010. 2010 was when the UK introduced open access for all its published research. And it said any publicly funded research has to be open access. And that's when these predatory publishers started to come along. And I'm not going into the details here, but Jeffrey Bill did quite a lot of work on identifying those publishers and journals, etc. And there's some controversy around that. But so there's an organisation called Cabals, which you may or may not have heard of. This is a subscription-only organisation. You can only get it at an institutional level, and I think it's quite expensive, although I don't know the price. And they keep a list of journal analytics, and predatory reports. Journal analytics are good journals. Predatory reports are bad journals. So they maintain journals in 18 academic disciplines and 37 medical disciplines. They've looked at 39,000 journals, and I think about 15,000 of them are marked as predatory. So that's 15,000 journals, predatory journals, that Cabals have identified. This paper goes back to 2015, if you're interested, the DOI's there. They looked at predatory journals, and in 2010, they identified 53,000 articles which were published in predatory journals, 2010. 2014, they identified 420,000 articles that were published in predatory journals. That's 2014. I can't, and I sort of work in this area, or I try to, I can't find the data for, say, 2023 or 2022. And it'll almost certainly, I mean, if we class this as exponential, although 2 points, you can't do that, but it'll be growing. It's not going to be dropping down. So it's a real problem that these publishers are making loads of money. And the biggest publisher that does it is a publisher called Omics. If you've ever submitted to an Omics journal, you need a slap. But Omics in 2010 published 77 journals. In 2020, something like that, I've got some data on it somewhere, they published 990 journals, and they were fined $50.1 million US by the US for predatory practices. They've never paid it because they're not based in the US. So that's predatory publishing. Just as a diversion before we move on to the next thing, there's a whole industry of people writing essays, students, theses, papers for students. And there's a whole industry behind that of blackmailing those students. If they use you and then you submit the work, then they write to you and say, you need to give us more money, otherwise we're going to tell your institution and you might have your degree revoked. And they even say that you've got to have a meeting with the Department of Education and you could be fined £10,000 or imprisoned for 6 months, which is totally nonsense. I mean, you might have your degree revoked, but you're not going to go to prison or pay £10,000. There's no law in the UK which upholds that. So let's go on to paper mills. So what paper mills are, if you're not aware, is people write papers for other people. So that's almost, I'll say to Beverly, I'll write you a paper, you give me a load of money, and then you can submit it. I don't want to be an author, etc., etc. And there's a massive industry in that. So this is a report from 2020. Independent sleuths, i.e. people who look at these sorts of things, they flagged more than 10,000 published papers potentially linked to paper mills, i.e. people that were just writing rubbish papers and getting people to pay to be authors on them. And you can see that it's in this article here. And this is from 2021. 2023, so this year, it says the capacity of paper mills to generate increasingly plausible raw data is just going to be skyrocketing with AI. Language generating AI tools such as ChatGPT pose a similar problem. As soon as you have something that can show that something's generated by ChatGPT, there'll be some other tool to scramble that. And we talked about that earlier. So I spoke to someone recently from Turnitin. Now, Turnitin is not a bad tool. If you put a paper through that, it works, but it can't detect ChatGPT generated paper. If it can, people put it through Turnitin, and then they use something like Grammarly or the tool that someone else mentioned. So there's ways of getting around that. So you can generate a paper with ChatGPT, So paper mills are a massive problem. And there's lots of companies out there who just focus on writing papers and then selling them to people who need to publish, this publish or perish. So, and there's lots of research on it. So this is, I think, from Scopus, looking just for paper mills in the title. We also have to put publishing, because there are things called paper mills which actually produce paper. But there's lots of papers which talk about paper mills. So the raw truth about paper mills, and threats to scholarly research integrity and rising from paper mills, a rapid scoping review. And these are recent articles, I mean, going back to 2020. But this is number 7, so there's 6 others above that. So paper mills are a massive problem anyway. Predatory publishing is a massive problem. Paper mills is a massive problem. Oh, this is one of the papers, the raw truth about paper mills. So it says, in the absence of real data, paper mills may need to fabricate raw data images when requesting requests from journals. So if you get a peer review and say, well, that image doesn't sound quite right, then you can ask, not ChatGPT, but a minute, Delhi or something to generate that image. And raw data might be created using templates. So it's a massive problem, and it's not something we can handle at the moment. We just simply we haven't got the technology to handle it. Another slight diversion, but on a similar topic. This goes back to about 2012. There was a tool called SciGen. If you Google it, you can find it, and you'll find the papers. That generates gobbledygook text. It's a computer science thing, so it looks like computer science. But unless you really know the area, you would struggle to determine that that was rubbish. I mean, if you knew the area, you could say, well, that just doesn't make sense. But if you didn't know the area, it comes up with some half-decent stuff. So SciGen was being used back in 2012, and there's still, they reckon, thousands of papers in the scientific literature that were generated by SciGen, typically in conferences, because they tend to be not peer-reviewed so strictly. So coming on to selling authorships, I'm getting near the end now. I'm good. So this is Facebook. So if you go onto Facebook and put in Scopus or buy authorship, you have to join a group, but why not? And then there's people looking. I have 2 papers in education, but funds issue. I wish to publish on HEI journal, but financial issue. If anyone help, or he or she will be first author. Looking for 2 authors who can share 2,000 APC article processing charge. For a ready-to-submit article related to chemistry, title will be shared. There's lots of them, and even some of them give a price. I think this is probably in Indian rupee. But these papers will be published by paper mills, because essentially they're offering 7 authorship slots. If you want to be first author, 25,000, thank you very much. If you want to be 7th author, 10,000. That'll almost certainly be generated by a paper mill. And you buy an authorship. And people do that because they need to publish. And then some of them, and I tend to keep an eye on these, so this one is stupid enough to give the name of the journal, and you can check that it is the right journal by checking the impact factor and the title. So I tend to keep those, and then every so often go back and just see if they've been published, and see, how many authors are on there and where they're from and things. So selling authorships is a massive problem. Predatory publishing, massive problem. Paper mills, massive problem. Selling authorships, massive problem. Pre-November 2022, all massive problems. Now, we can use ChatGPT to generate articles, and if we all got our computers out now, I don't know how many's in the room, 150, 160 of you, before we go to lunch, we could generate 160 articles. We could. I mean, you can laugh, but we could. Or I could go home tonight and I can generate dozens of articles using ChatGPT. I can then sell the authorships, and I could, if I was being particularly nasty, which these people are, send it to predatory journals, because the review is a lot less. And if the author is not aware of where the paper's going, then you might as well send it to a predatory journal. And all of this, and this has been happening for years, but I think this is going to have a real effect on the scientific archive. The scientific archive is already compromised, but selling authorships, predatory journals, with ChatGPT is going to make that problem much, much, much worse over the coming months, but certainly years. So the only solution I've got, or the only solution I can come up with, and I've asked a few people and they say it's more complicated, is open science. Now what open science says is that all peer reviews and author responses must be published with the paper. So you publish the paper, you see all the peer reviews, you see all the author's responses, and then as a reader you can make a judgment whether that's nonsense or not. But I don't really know why. If someone's got a reason why that's not a good idea, I'd like to hear it, because I don't think we can do anything else other than go towards open science. And if journals don't do open science, then you should be very wary of them. Nearly ahead of the game. So we published this paper earlier this year, myself and a colleague of mine in Japan. The risks and abuse of large language models like ChatGPT in scientific publishing, authorships, predatory publishing and paper mills. So a lot of what I've talked about here is taken from that paper. Not all of it. I mean, I don't think I used the F-word paper in there. I can't remember now. It's a while since I've done it. But these are the key points. Academia is already witnessing the abuse of authorships. LLMs are testing the limits of publishing ethics. The abuse of ChatGPT for the paper mills industry cannot be overemphasised. And detection of LLMs generated text is the responsibility of the editors and the publishers, but I don't think they have the tools to be able to do that. But it's their responsibility. They're the ones who accept your paper and publish it in their journal, but they don't have the tools to do that yet. Okay, and if you're interested, there's some papers that I published in this sort of broad area on ChatGPT and ethics in publishing. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions for Professor Graham Kendall?
Thanks, Graham. I just wondered, really, don't you think it's the university's responsibility to a large extent this problem has occurred because of that, that pressure to publish for every single academic, when sometimes, we don't need any more academic papers in a particular area, but there's so much pressure and time pressure for them to publish that in some ways it's also the university's fault from kind of the other side of the spectrum.
It certainly is the university problem, but as we heard from the very first talk this morning, we are under pressure to publish, and the university set KPIs. I mean, and I totally disagree with this. I'm going to upset a few people here now. In Malaysia, they typically say you must publish in Q1 and Q2 journals. In what, Web of Science or Scopus, it doesn't matter. That's absolute nonsense, because those categories, you can have 4 categories for a journal, and let's say I publish in AI, but it's also in computer science. AI is Q3, computer science is Q2. What do I say? I say Q2, because it's a Q2 journal, although my paper's been published in AI. So next year, that journal could have gone from Q3 to Q4 or Q2 to Q3. Then what do? I come up for promotion, I give it to the Vice-Chancellor here, and he says, "No, I'm sorry, you haven't got it in a Q2." So the universities do have a responsibility, but the universities are in a competitive environment. If one university changes its SOP and says, "That's all right, lads, you don't have to publish," then they're going to fall down the rankings.
Any other questions for Professor Graham Kendall? Yes.
Okay. As I also publishing paper to the journal like Elsevier, and now I remember that Elsevier they written a statement to ask us to declare whether we are using ChatGPT to write our article, and then now I'm thinking I don't know whether they have any other AI software to detect whether our journal is written by ChatGPT. And then I also want to know about, is there any way that we can use the AI technology to solve the predatory publishing, paper mills, and all these selling authorship problem? So actually my main aim is whether we have any like AI technology that can detect a fake journal paper written by another AI generative tools, and also whether the this AI to solve all these unethical problems in the future. What do you see?
So in answer to your first question, in one of these papers that we published, we said that you should acknowledge whether you use ChatGPT or not. And I think it comes back to what Beverly was saying, similar sort of idea. And all the papers I write at the moment, I put, we did not use a large language model, because I don't. But I might do, and then I could declare it, and that's fine. If that was found out not to be the case, if I declared I said it didn't use an LLM, but it did, then that paper should be retracted, because you're conning the readers. In answer to your second question, I think we had this discussion briefly earlier about AI detecting other AIs. I think it's an arms race. We could probably put our heads together and come up with an AI bot which would detect it. Next week, we won't, because someone would have developed something else, or someone would have put it through ChatGPT, then Grammarly, then Bard or whatever, and then they stick it through, turn it in, or whatever they do, and you won't do it. So I think it's an arms race. So I think if you do find someone's used ChatGPT and they haven't declared it, you have to be pretty strict with them. You should retract it. And there's a website called Retraction Watch, which sort of lists all the papers that get retracted. And the number of papers that get retracted is fairly small compared to the number of expressions of concern that are raised, because you're raising expressions of concern if you think a paper should be retracted. And retracting a paper can take 3, 4, 5 years, because the editors have to look at it, they send it out, they come to a judgment, etc. But in the meantime, that one paper's taken 5 years, thousands of others have entered the scientific literature. So I don't have an answer, other than it's an arms race, and we're probably way behind the curve on it.